Hey guys, tonight we begin in the dim hush of a one-room hut, the kind where the roof leaks when it snows sideways, and the wind whistles straight through the doorframe. You're lying on a lumpy mattress stuffed with straw, wrapped in a scratchy wool blanket that doesn't quite reach your feet. There's a thin layer of frost on your eyelashes. Welcome to winter, 14th century style. This is not your average fireside fantasy. It's dark, it's damp, and honestly, you probably won't survive this winter unless you get clever fast or get cozy with a goat. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love to know, where are you listening from, and what time is it there right now? Post it in the comments. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge to the door in the gray pre-dawn, boots half frozen and hair still damp from the snow melt dripping through the thatch overnight. Outside, it's worse, white wind biting your skin through 3 layers, and a sky the color of ash. There's no time for standing around. Someone has to check the fire, someone has to milk the goat, and someone has to make sure the family pig hasn't frozen to the floorboards again. Back inside, the single room of your medieval peasant cottage is eerily quiet. No snooze buttons or alarm clocks here, just the scrape of your cousin coughing in the dark, and the heavy breathing of a household packed like a hay bale. The temperature inside might be 2 degrees warmer than out, and only if someone managed to keep a tiny coal glowing in the hearth overnight. And that hearth, it's not some picturesque stone fireplace with an iron kettle swinging cheerily above the embers. It's a dirt pit with 3 charred logs and a lot of smoke. Your eyes sting when you bend close, trying to coax life from the ashes. If you're lucky, you'll have a few twigs to burn today. If not, well, the nearby woods are technically the Lord's property, and his men don't look kindly on poachers, even the kind just gathering kindling. Medieval winters didn't pull punches. Historians still argue whether the Little Ice Age started in the late 13th or early 14th century, but one thing's clear: peasants were always cold, especially in northern Europe, where the days shrank to nubs and the nights stretched on like long sighs. There were no down jackets, no double glazing, just drafty wooden walls, animal skins if you were lucky, and a communal bed stuffed with hay. And speaking of beds, yours is more like a shared nest. You've got 2 siblings at your back, an elderly uncle snoring into your shoulder, and a dog. At least you hope it's the dog curled up under your knees. The concept of personal space is centuries away from invention. You sleep in a tangle because shared body heat is the only central heating you're getting this century. Some families even brought the livestock inside: goats, pigs, chickens, all crammed into the corners or beneath benches, snoring, steaming, and occasionally stealing leftover crumbs. Not exactly hygienic, but warm, absolutely. A full-grown pig is basically a living hot water bottle, minus the floral cover. Outside, the cold is unrelenting. Every task, from breaking ice to draw water, to chopping firewood with numb hands, becomes a survival mission. Even nature seems to conspire against you. Your boots are made of old leather stiff as bark. Your gloves, if you have them, are fingerless. And that wool tunic your aunt knit, it's itchy and damp, but you'll wear it every single day until May. Even your breath becomes your enemy. Condensation gathers on your blanket and freezes into lace. Your nose sticks to itself when you breathe wrong. Your fingernails ache from the cold, and by evening they'll ache from the work too. Still, you carry on. Because peasants didn't have the luxury of complaining about winter, they just had to outlast it. They made do with what they had: dried peas, salted pork, barley mash, and hope, and maybe, just maybe, the promise that spring would eventually crawl back over the horizon. There's a saying passed around the village: cold makes honest men out of all. No one's sure what it means, but it sounds ancient and wise when mumbled around a meager fire. So you press your back against the warmest wall, huddle into your scratchy blanket, and close your eyes. You try not to think about the wind that's already sneaking back under the door, or the fact that tomorrow will be just as cold and maybe twice as hard. For now, at least, you've survived another night. You reach for your clothes before you open your eyes. They're stiff, clammy from the night before, and crumpled in a heap beside your bedding. Putting them on feels like wrapping yourself in damp parchment, but that's winter for you. There's no separate closet in a peasant's house, just corners, hooks, and hopeful folds. What you wore yesterday is what you'll wear today, and most likely all through next week. Layering is your lifeline. First goes a linen shirt, the one with frayed cuffs and a few suspicious stains from last month's turnip stew. Then a second shirt, if you're lucky enough to own two. On top of that, a heavy wool tunic, thick with lanolin and history. If it's especially cold, you might even wrap a tattered cloak around your shoulders, stitched from leftover scraps or passed down through more winters than you can count. The rich have furs, fox, marten, even bear, but you make do with sheep's wool and rabbit pelts sewn into crude cuffs and collars. Some peasants even wear felted straw between their layers, an itchy but surprisingly effective insulator. And under it all, of course, are your brays, baggy medieval underwear, which may or may not have seen a wash this month. Every piece of clothing is essential. Every layer traps a little warmth, a tiny buffer between your skin and the cold that never really goes away. When the wind picks up outside, you wrap a coarse scarf around your face and tuck your hands into your sleeves like some shaggy cocoon. Gloves are rare. Mittens, if they exist, are made from rough-spun wool and look like something a scarecrow rejected. And here's the thing about medieval fashion: it wasn't about fashion. It was about not dying. Tunics are long because drafts are clever. Hoods are pointed to funnel rain away from your eyes. Leg wrappings, called puttees or cross-garters, help trap heat around your calves and occasionally trip you if tied wrong. Your whole outfit is a negotiation with winter. Let me keep my toes, and I promise not to complain about the wet sheep smell. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants understood layering as a system or simply wore everything they owned because there was nowhere else to put it. The result, either way, was effective. People waddled, they rustled, and they stank, but they were marginally warmer than they would have been otherwise. You head outside, boots crunching into the frozen mud, and already your layers feel insufficient. Your breath puffs like smoke, and you swear you just saw a squirrel sneeze. Even the chickens look offended by the weather. It's on days like this that layering isn't just about clothing, it's about attitude. You don't have the option to retreat to a cozy CAF or crank the thermostat, so you learn to think warm. You move deliberately, stomp your feet, and hunch your shoulders like you're bracing against a personal storm cloud. You hum, you whistle, you mutter prayers, some of them half-invented, just to keep your mind moving faster than the frost creeping into your sleeves. Back inside, your neighbors resemble small bundles of laundry more than people. Children wear miniature tunics and oversized cloaks. Grandparents disappear under so many shawls and kerchiefs they look like nesting dolls. Someone wears a hat that used to be a mitten. Someone else is wrapped in what might have once been a curtain. Fashion is democratic in winter. Anything goes, so long as it traps heat. And when the layering fails, as it often does, there's always movement. Fetch water, turn the spit, stir the soup, chase the chickens. Chopping wood isn't just productive, it's an act of self-preservation. A body in motion stays warm. A body at rest is a frozen turnip. So you keep layering, keep moving, and keep breathing. Because out here, in the coldest corner of the year, your clothes aren't just fabric, they're armor. Thin, wholly questionably scented armor, but armor all the same. By now you've layered yourself like a resilient onion and braved the brittle morning air, but it's nighttime that tests you most. The cold thickens after sundown. It pushes through every crack in the walls, every knot in the timber, every uneven patch of daub between the wooden slats of your cottage. You quickly learn that the best insulation isn't wattle and daub, it's other people. Your sleeping arrangement is less a bed and more a shared wool pile. If you've ever wondered what it's like to be a sardine, congratulations, you're about to find out. A family of 6 might squeeze into a space meant for 3 limbs, tangled like a heap of marionettes. The order matters, smallest in the middle, largest on the outside to block the breeze. You settle in shoulder to shoulder, stomach to back, nobody daring to shift for fear of losing a warm patch. This isn't just affection, it's strategy. Body heat is precious, and in a medieval peasant home it's the main source of nighttime warmth. Your little sister's elbow may jab your ribs all night, but her breath keeps your neck from freezing. Beds in the traditional sense are rare. A few families have wooden frames with ropes or slats strung beneath a straw-stuffed mattress. Most, though, sleep directly on the floor atop woven mats, hay sacks, or even old cloaks folded over bundles of grass. Hay is surprisingly effective. It insulates, it cushions, and, if you're lucky, it only houses 1 or 2 mice. In wealthier peasant homes, yes, that's a thing, there might be a wooden bench bed with a curtain or 2 to block the wind. But for the majority, your bedroom is simply wherever the floor is driest and the pigs won't step on you. Yes, pigs. They might be noisy, greedy, and prone to relieving themselves indoors, but they also give off tremendous warmth. A full-grown pig can raise the room temperature several degrees just by being there. Some families bring the sow in every night, tucking her into a corner with a bit of straw and a bucket of old turnips. She's not exactly housebroken, but she's warm, and in winter, that's worth forgiving a little mess. Cows, too, if space allows, might be stabled in the same building. Their breath steams into the room like a sluggish fog. Chickens roost in corners. A dog curls at your feet, eyes glowing faintly in the dark. The whole household becomes a strange breathing ecosystem of heat conservation. The room smells like wool, smoke, animal dander, and unwashed humans. But those smells are strangely comforting when the alternative is cold silence. Sound, too, plays a role. The rhythmic breathing of your sleeping kin, the occasional snort from the pig, the pop of embers in the hearth, all create a kind of low, sleepy symphony. You don't need lullabies. You've got livestock. Some villages even practiced what you might call rotational sleeping. If you'd been working outside all day, you'd be offered the warmest corner, or a turn beside the hearth. The elderly and infants usually got priority, though if the firewood was running low, all bets were off. There are stories, half legend, half likely true, of people sleeping upright in chairs just to stay close to the fire, or sleeping in shifts, each person rotating toward the embers like a lazy rotisserie. Still, there's something weirdly cozy about it all. You wrap yourself in your layers, pull your cap over your ears, and wedge your knees into the back of someone who probably just stole your blanket. The cold hums at the edges of your body, but you're not alone. In a medieval peasant home, that's your greatest defense. Not a thick wall or roaring fire, but the press of people and pigs who don't mind sharing breath. Tomorrow, you'll stretch your aching limbs and brush the straw from your hair, but tonight you sleep in a woven nest of shared survival. The hearth is everything. Not just in that metaphorical center of the home way, though that's certainly true, but in a brutally practical life-or-death way, too. Without a fire, your home isn't a home. It's a barn with regrets. It's a freezer that moos. And here's the kicker. Keeping a fire going overnight is one of the hardest, most exhausting parts of peasant life. Firewood doesn't grow on trees. Technically it does, but so do laws. Nearly every bit of forest belongs to someone higher up the feudal food chain, and those lords don't take kindly to peasants gathering sticks without permission. The penalty for stealing firewood in some regions: fines, beatings, or worse, a winter without heat. So you learn to scavenge smart. After harvest season, families roam the fields looking for leftover stubble and dried weeds. Children gather dried animal dung. Yes, really, it burns surprisingly well. The best find of all, a fallen branch from the manor woods, hopefully unspotted by the gamekeeper. If you're extremely fortunate, you've got your own small woodpile hidden, protected and guarded like treasure. Each stick is a decision. Burn it now and be warm for 10 minutes, or save it for tomorrow and freeze tonight. The hearth itself is a simple construction, a shallow pit dug into the center of the floor or raised slightly on stone. There's no chimney, just a hole in the roof to let the smoke escape. Sometimes, sort of. Mostly it just lingers in the air, turning your one-room cottage into a slow-cooked peasant stew. Your eyes water constantly. You cough more in winter, but the smoke does one helpful thing: it fumigates the lice. Above the fire pit, if you're clever, you hang a basic iron trivet or hook. This is your cooking station, your drying rack, your foot warmer, and your light source. No candles, no lanterns, just this one orange eye glowing in the darkness, fed carefully with scraps of fuel. Night falls early in winter, and when it does, the hearth becomes your whole world. Everyone huddles near it, backs to the cold, faces flushed from the flickering heat. The cat tries to sit directly in the flames. Your grandfather holds his gnarled hands out like he's asking for something that never quite arrives. Soup simmers in a cracked pot, more water than vegetables, but hot enough to steam your nose and give the illusion of fullness. Firewood is rationed like gold. 1 log, maybe 2 if it's a special night. The coals are precious. Your mother teaches you how to bank them with ash, tucking them into a little hill so they stay glowing all night. If you get it right, you'll wake to a bed of red embers, ready to coax back to life. If not, well, hope someone's willing to trek through the snow at dawn. Some families trade secrets: how to burn peat, how to make a fire starter from dried moss soaked in animal fat, how to twist straw into tight coils that burn slowly. Every flame is hard-earned, every spark a small miracle. And when the fire dies completely, the silence is terrifying. The temperature plummets, breath fogs and lingers, pipes freeze, fingers sting. A cottage without fire is a place of dread, quiet, dark, and suddenly hostile. So you learn the rhythms of the hearth: how to stack logs for slow burns, how to scrape together tinder from almost nothing, how to share its warmth without hogging the flame. It's not just a tool, it's a member of the family. A temperamental one, prone to sulking and smoke, but one that keeps you alive. Historians still debate just how often peasants managed to keep their hearths lit through the worst of winter. Diaries suggest many let the fire go out at night and reignited it each morning with flint and steel. Tedious, risky, and not always successful. Others may have relied on glowing coals carried in clay pots from neighbor to neighbor, like embers of community itself. So tonight, before you sleep, you check the fire one last time. You poke at the ashes, adjust a half-burned log, and whisper a small plea to whatever saint governs warmth. Then you wrap yourself in smoke-scented blankets, hoping you've banked enough heat to get you through till morning. Because in winter, the hearth is the heart, and if it goes cold, so do you. Steam rises in the cold morning air, not from a bath, obviously, but from a pot that's doing double duty, boiling turnips for breakfast and warming your socks at the same time. Welcome to the world of medieval multitasking. Food and heat were never separate concepts in a peasant's life. If you were lucky enough to be cooking, that meant you were standing near the hearth. And if you were near the hearth, you were probably thawing out your fingers or toasting your boots while stirring the pot. Nothing got done without serving at least 2 functions. You didn't just cook soup, you also softened yesterday's bread in it, steamed your bonnet dry above it, and used the leftover heat to gently warm the dog. This morning your stew is humble. A few slices of onion, some wilted greens, and, on a very lucky day, a sliver or two of salted meat. But the real magic is the broth. Not for its flavor. Let's be honest, it mostly tastes like wet bark, but for its warmth. Hot liquid in your stomach is the fastest way to feel like maybe, just maybe, you won't freeze to death before noon. You dip a chunk of bread into the steaming pot and hold it there a little too long. That's not a mistake. You're deliberately soaking it soft because biting into frozen crust can chip a tooth. In winter, meals slow down, not out of leisure but out of survival instinct. And then there are the socks. Woolen, coarse, and probably patched more times than they've been washed, they hang from a stick suspended over the fire, flapping slightly in the updraft. You hope they dry before your shift in the fields, but honestly, less wet might be the best you can ask for. If they catch fire, it won't be the first time. The faint scent of singed footgear is one of winter's signature smells. Steam wasn't just for cooking or drying. It also became a substitute for bathing, especially during the cold months when washing with actual water was tantamount to asking for pneumonia. You might hover over a pot of boiling nettle tea, towel draped over your head, and inhale deeply as your pores open just enough to pretend you're cleansing something. If your joints ached from the cold, you'd hold them near a steaming rag. If your baby had a cough, you'd wave them over a bubbling infusion of thyme and hope. Even the animals got in on it. Chickens, when not banished to the far corners of the house, occasionally nestled near the pots, eyes half closed in dreamy poultry bliss. Cats, meanwhile, treated the hearth area like their birthright, usually curling up beside the fire and looking deeply offended if you tried to move them. By late morning, the stew is gone, the socks are damp dry, and the pot itself has cooled enough to be rinsed in a bucket of yesterday's slightly less filthy water. You scrape out the bottom with a bit of straw, then toss the remains to the pig, who accepts this offering like royalty, grunting approvingly. There's no such thing as idle heat. Everything warm is repurposed, redirected, squeezed for all it's worth. You hold your mittens over the embers before heading out. You press your face briefly against the lid of the pot. You even warm your wooden spoon, because cold utensils make pot soup taste like regret. And in the evening, the cycle repeats. You fill the pot again, not because you're hungry, but because it's the only way to push back against the creeping cold. Heat by mouth, heat by steam, heat by osmosis. Historians still argue whether this constant low-grade cooking constituted a proto-central heating system, or simply a side effect of needing food and fire at the same time. But for peasants it was instinct. You boiled everything. Water for tea, soup for dinner, herbs for coughs, rags for wounds, socks for sanity. Boiling was survival. So as the wind rattles the shutters and your knees creak from the day's work, you return to your pot. Tonight's stew might include barley, or maybe not, but it'll be hot, and that's what matters. You dip your spoon and breathe in the steam. It smells faintly of turnips, damp wool, and desperation. But it also smells like safety. It's late now. The fire has gone soft and red, casting sleepy shadows across the walls. You're tucked into your layered haybed nest, chin buried beneath a wool blanket that smells vaguely of sheep and soup, and just when you think you've finally stopped shivering, you realize your nose is freezing off. Enter the medieval nightcap. Not the kind you drink, though that'd be nice, but the one you wear. A soft cone-shaped, often saggy bit of cloth designed specifically to keep your ears, scalp, and sanity from succumbing to the nighttime chill. You tug it down snugly, making sure it covers everything that can be covered without cutting off circulation. The nightcap might not be glamorous, but it's as essential as boots or mittens. It keeps heat from escaping through your head, which, surprise, leaks warmth like a cracked cauldron. Children wear them. Old folks wear them. Even the village priest wears one, though his is suspiciously clean. There's also a special version for babies, a wool bonnet with ear flaps, and a strap that ties under the chin so it won't slip off mid-squirm. Historians have even dug up sketches of hoods with little nose flaps. No, really, to keep the most vulnerable tip of the face warmed during especially cruel winters. It might sound silly now, but if you've ever tried to fall asleep while your nose turns into an icicle, you'll understand why someone would invent a facial mitten. And nightwear doesn't stop at hats. Some peasants sew thick patches into the collars of their tunics to create makeshift cowls. Others wrap scarves around their heads like winter turbans. Socks, if you own a second pair, become nighttime treasure, slid on over dry feet, or dryish feet anyway, before tucking into the cold bed. But here's a problem you're probably not expecting: sweat. Yes, sweat. It's the cruel joke of medieval winter sleeping. You bundle up so tightly that by midnight, the parts of you closest to your siblings or your pig, or whatever heat source is currently squishing your spine, start to sweat. That dampness quickly cools, leaving you simultaneously steamy and freezing. You shift slightly, but that only lets cold air in. You debate removing a layer, but doing so would unleash a thermal apocalypse. So you lie there, head encased in your floppy wool tower, neck sticky, nose cold, arms numb, legs vaguely warm, and think this is fine. The more resourceful villagers try homemade improvements. One neighbor sews cloth sleeves to their nightcap, like a built-in scarf. Another sleeps with heated stones wrapped in cloth placed near their feet. A truly innovative soul once tried stuffing goose feathers into a pouch and tying it to his chest. It exploded around midnight, turning his bedding into a small blizzard, but he claimed it worked for about half an hour. Sometimes you dream of fur. Not in a luxury sense, just in the wouldn't it be nice if I were a bear kind of way. Bears, after all, don't need nightcaps, or blankets, or arguments over who stole the good spot near the pig. Historians still puzzle over whether peasants owned separate sleepwear, or simply slept in what they wore during the day. Most evidence leans toward the latter. A tunic, some braize, and maybe a cloak pulled over you like a stiff burrito. Anything soft was rare. Anything labeled bedclothes probably just meant this tunic has fewer holes. But the nightcap endures. It becomes more than clothing, it becomes a comfort. A signal to the brain that the day is done, the chores can rest, and whatever heat you've managed to hoard is now yours alone. You shift one more time, adjust the cap so it stops riding up your ear, and nestle in deeper. Outside, the wind howls softly, brushing past the shutter like a ghost who forgot their appointment. But your head is warm, your nose is almost warm, and for a few precious hours, that's enough. Somewhere in the deep night, your eyes open. Not from a nightmare or the call of nature, but simply because, well, it's time. You don't know how you know, but your body stirs with the subtle rhythm of the two-sleep system. Modern folks might think humans were always meant to sleep in one solid block, but the medieval body had a different schedule. After a few hours of heavy slumber, you'd wake naturally, groggy but lucid, in the cold, dark belly of the night. This quiet, thoughtful intermission could last an hour or more. And then, if all went well, you'd drift into your second sleep until dawn. Tonight, the hearth is just embers. The pig snorts softly in her corner. Your siblings snore in unison like a poorly tuned choir. But you're awake, blinking at the ceiling beams and adjusting your wool nightcap so it doesn't fall into your eyes. What do you do now? Lots of things. If you were a typical medieval peasant, you might poke at the coals, adding a twig or two to nurse the fire back into a gentle flicker. You might murmur a few quiet prayers, especially if the wind is loud or if someone said the woods were haunted again. Maybe you roll over and whisper to your bedmate, nothing urgent, just a bit of idle conversation to pass the time while your limbs cool and your mind meanders. Sometimes you sit up fully and tend to small tasks, mend a bit of clothing by firelight, rub salve into aching joints, swaddle the baby tighter, or shoo a curious chicken off the bread pile. If you're feeling philosophical, and many were, this was the time for reflection. Historical records describe first sleep and second sleep as normal phenomena. Monks used it for nighttime prayers. Peasants might recount dreams, gossip, or recite psalms. Some even believed the waking period was a gift, an hour when the world was still and the veil between divine and mortal thinned. Historians still argue whether the two-sleep cycle was biological, cultural, or just what happens when your day ends at sunset and there's no Netflix. But the consistency of the reports across countries, centuries, and social classes suggests it was a widespread and accepted rhythm of life. For you, it's a kind of floating peace. You're not worried, not exactly, just aware of how cold your toes are, aware of how tightly your sister is clinging to your arm, aware of the faintest scent of baked cabbage still lingering in the air. Some nights, if it's not too cold, you'll even step outside, just for a moment. The stars above your thatched roof are impossibly clear, and the world feels hushed in a way it never does by day. The frost crunches under your feet. Your breath spirals upward like a smoke signal to the moon. You look, you listen, you nod to the universe, and then you scurry back inside before your nose falls off. Back in bed, you wriggle into position again. The layers have shifted. Someone stole the pig's blanket. Your elbow is numb. You yank the wool up over your ears and exhale slowly. And then, without ceremony, you fall back asleep. The second sleep is usually lighter, dreamier, and oddly more comforting. It carries you past the darkest stretch of the night, through the earliest cockcrow, until the faint gray glow of dawn starts to sneak under the doorframe. When you finally wake for good, it's as though the night happened in chapters. Not a single story, but two small ones, stitched together with warmth, breath, and the slow tick of frost melting off the rafters. You're awake again, this time for real. The horizon is just beginning to smudge with faint gray light, and already the cold has crept into your bones like a nosy houseguest. But before the day's labor begins, there's a flicker of something rare, warmth of another kind. It's feast day. And that means, for once, you're not shuffling into the fields or hauling water with a stiff back and a frozen nose. Instead, you're invited, no, expected to gather with neighbors, with ale, and with song. In the depths of winter, communal warmth isn't just about fire, it's about people, about crowding into a smoky room and letting the press of bodies and voices lift the edge off the season's chill. You pull on your cleanest tunic, still stained, but less crusty than the others, and trudge through the frost to the village longhouse. The air is thick with anticipation and the tang of roasting parsnips. Someone's brought out a jug of weak cider. Someone else is already tuning a fiddle with an expression of great seriousness, despite only knowing two tunes. The ceiling drips from condensation. The floor is dirt, the benches are creaky, but nobody cares, because today the warmth comes from cheer. You take your seat between neighbors whose names you don't quite remember, and a cousin who may have recently stolen your mittens. There's laughter already, and not just the polite kind, the real kind, giddy, breathy, full of relief. This isn't a royal banquet. It's a shared pot of barley porridge. Maybe some boiled meat if the Lord's kitchen sent down scraps. A peasant feast is less about abundance and more about company. You all drink from the same cup, share the same bread, exchange the same stories told last year and the year before that. There's something healing about it. When a dozen or more cold-numbed villagers pack into a hall lit by fire and voices, the temperature rises. You can feel it physically. shoulders loosen, faces flush. The fire burns brighter, if only because more wood's been found for this rare occasion. And then the songs begin. They're not polished. They're not always in tune, but they're sung with force, half to the saints, half to the ceiling. The lyrics are old. Praises to the harvest, mockery of the tax collector, bawdy jokes about sheep that you won't be repeating around the priest. You might even find yourself stomping along, forgetting, just for a moment, the layers of wool, the cracked skin on your hands, the drafty roof waiting at home. Historians suggest these moments, feast days, saints' days, midwinter gatherings, were essential not just socially, but psychologically. In an age before heating, before therapy, before vitamin D supplements, communal celebration was a form of medicine. Still, there's structure to it all. Rules. Elders get the first ladle of soup. Children sit closest to the fire, but furthest from the cider. Everyone gets a turn to speak, even if half of them just mutter about the weather. One neighbor recites a folktale about the frost spirits who sneak into beds left unblessed. Another performs a dramatic retelling of his heroic battle with a frozen privy seat. You all laugh because you've been there. And as the evening deepens, the ale thins, and the fire dims, you begin to notice something. You're warm. Not just on your skin, but somewhere deeper. In that slow, glowing way that doesn't come from fire or wool. It comes from being together, from sharing the struggle and the silliness and the sound of a dozen people who made it through another freezing day. By the time you return home, the stars are out. Your boots are damp, your tunic smells like smoke and onions, and your cheeks hurt from smiling. You crawl back into bed beside the pig, pull your nightcap low, and drift off with a half-remembered tune looping in your mind. It's still cold, but not quite so cold as before. You wake up needing to pee. And that, in medieval winter, is a crisis. You lie there a moment, trying to bargain with your bladder. Maybe you can fall back asleep. Maybe if you don't move, the urge will go away. But it doesn't. It intensifies until you feel like your kidneys are trying to send a diplomatic envoy to your brain. So you sigh, curse softly under your breath, and prepare for the worst part of the night, using the bathroom. Now let's be clear, there is no bathroom. Not in the house, not down the hall, not behind a curtain. There is only the outside, which in January is a place of unspeakable cruelty. The outhouse, if your family has one, is a wooden box perched over a pit a few dozen steps from your cottage, down a path covered in snow and possibly haunted. You layer back up wool tunic, scarf, your not quite dry mittens, and slip on your boots. They crunch slightly from the frost that crept inside overnight. You try not to think about the last time someone cleaned out the privy, or whether the seat is currently frozen into something resembling a medieval popsicle. Alternatively, if you're lucky or lazy, you might opt for the peasant's secret weapon, the chamber pot. It's not glamorous. It's not even ceramic. Just a wooden or metal bowl tucked under the bed, shared by the family and carefully emptied come morning. The pot, when full, is heavy. Sloshes are dangerous. And if someone forgets to dump it, well, let's just say a few cottage floors have regretted that decision. Tonight you go for the pot. But it's cold. So cold it could pass for a medieval ice bucket challenge. You do your business quickly, wincing, trying not to wake your siblings or offend the pig. The air bites at your ankles. You fumble the lid back on, slide it carefully beneath the bed, and whisper a quiet apology to tomorrow you. But some nights the pot isn't available. Maybe it's full. Maybe someone knocked it over. Maybe the last person to use it forgot to put it back, and now it's outside, frozen to the ground. On those nights you trudge to the outhouse, past the sleeping chickens, past the goose who hisses like she's guarding royal treasure, past the field fence under the brittle moonlight. The outhouse itself is barely more than a crooked box. The door creaks like a horror story. The seat, mercifully a hole and not a plank, smells exactly like you expect. You balance over it with all the grace of someone trying to hover above a cold abyss. And then you sprint back inside like your feet are on fire. Once home, it takes forever to warm up. Your fingers are numb, your thighs ache, your breath fogs the window even after you're back under the covers. You tuck the blanket around you like a burrito and glare into the darkness, daring your bladder to speak up again. These little rituals were part of winter life. Chamber pots had to be emptied first thing each morning, usually by the youngest or least influential member of the household. Outhouses had to be shoveled out, sometimes with straw or ash added to mask the stench. In some places, you could dig your own pit in the yard and hope it lasted the season. Historians still argue how often peasants actually braved the cold versus relying on indoor solutions. Some houses may have had designated slop corners covered with hay. Others may have used buckets lined with cloth or moss. Sanitation wasn't the goal, minimizing frostbite was. In wealthier homes, a garderobe, a small, vertical shaft built into the wall, let residents relieve themselves directly into a pit below. Peasants, on the other hand, relied on creativity, urgency, and a certain grim acceptance of discomfort. So tonight, as you settle back into your pile of straw and wool, you appreciate the warmth a little more. The fire flickers low. The chamber pot rests, mercifully intact, beneath the bed, and though the wind howls outside, your bladder is quiet. For now. The youngest child is whimpering again. It's not a nightmare this time, it's cold fingers, a chattering jaw, the kind of discomfort that keeps you squirming even in your sleep. You hear the small rustling movements from the corner where the children sleep, and then a sniffle, then another. Eventually, someone mutters, "Get closer to the hearth." But there's no getting closer. Not really. The fire's a slumped pile of gray, and the hearthstone still radiates some warmth, but not enough to heat an entire family, let alone a small, shivering child curled into a ball. So someone stirs, maybe it's you, maybe it's their older sister, and reaches out with one hand to pull the child into a warmer pocket of the communal bed. It's a sleepy, automatic gesture, but it's survival-level generosity, because in a peasant household, winter comfort was a privilege carefully rationed, and the littlest often got the worst share of it. Every cottage arranged its sleeping space differently, but most had one consistent rule. Children slept near the heat source. Sometimes that was the fire, sometimes a stack of hay tucked into a corner, and sometimes, if fortune smiled, a spot directly beneath the family's thickest blanket. But even then, warmth wasn't guaranteed. Drafts could cut across the floor like blades, and the thinnest limbs suffered first. Little ones would often be swaddled in so many layers of wool and linen that they resembled small fabric loaves. Mothers tied scarves around their heads, tucked rags around their feet, and sometimes even put them to bed with warm stones wrapped in cloth, assuming there were stones to spare. In some homes, babies slept in cradles suspended from rafters, away from pests and pigs. These were gently rocked at night, partly to soothe, partly to keep them from stiffening in the cold. And in the very poorest homes, the baby simply slept wherever there was room, bundled in an apron or tucked into a bread oven that had been warmed earlier in the evening. Yes, the oven. Not while it was lit, obviously, but many peasant women knew that a recently extinguished clay oven could radiate heat for hours. Tucking an infant inside was seen as clever, not cruel. It was, quite literally, using every corner of the house to survive. The bigger children weren't so lucky. They had to fend for themselves, huddling with cousins, using their cloaks as makeshift blankets, stealing warmth from dogs or cats brave enough to nestle in. Older siblings learned fast. If you let your feet hang off the edge, you'd regret it. If you hogged the center, you'd get elbowed. If you kicked, you'd be banished to the edge, where the frost had teeth. Still, the sleeping configuration was a social web, one that shifted with each season. In summer, everyone might spread out, but in winter, you pack in. Every body adds a degree of heat. Every inch matters. And despite the tight quarters, there's a quiet kind of comfort in the rhythm of shared breathing, the occasional whisper, the instinctive way people reposition during the night without fully waking. Historians have pieced together fragments of how children lived and slept in medieval peasant homes from household accounts, parish records, and the rare snippets of personal writing that survive. While the elite wrote about nursery chambers and nursemaids, peasant children left no letters behind. Their stories are told through patterns, where the bedding was thickest, where the footprints were smallest, where the hearthstones were worn smooth. And though we romanticize simpler times, nothing was simple about keeping a child warm through a winter night. You pull the blanket tighter over the small one's shoulders. They sigh and roll toward you, their breath a warm puff against your chin. The dog grumbles softly, adjusting its position at your feet. The fire has faded. The wind murmurs through the cracks, but for now the child is quiet, and so are you. Sleep returns tentative, shared, and a little warmer than before. You wake up with a snout in your ear. It snuffles, sighs, and promptly drools on your collar. You don't even flinch anymore because that's just Pig, and Pig lives here now. Not in the shed, not in the pen, but right here in the house near the fire on the same floor where your family sleeps. And to be fair, Pig's pulling her weight. She's warm for one. Like a mobile furnace with hooves, her body radiates heat that makes her smell slightly like toast, and when she curls up beside you, it's like spooning with a space heater that occasionally farts. Welcome to the medieval reality of bedding down with beasts. Livestock didn't just feed you. In winter, they kept you alive. A peasant cottage wasn't always divided into rooms or even levels. More often, it was a single large chamber where people, pigs, goats, dogs, chickens, and maybe a cow all shared space, not for sentiment, for survival. The logic is simple. Animals are warm, and in the dead of winter, warm equals precious. Your cow sleeps in the corner near the door, giving off slow waves of heat and a smell you've long stopped noticing. Chickens roost in the rafters. A goat might share your blanket if she's been especially charming that day, or if she headbutted the other goat out of the way first. It sounds chaotic, and it is, but also strangely cozy. At night, the room settles into a weird, rhythmic quiet. You've got your sister curled against your back, a dog pressed to your legs, Pig sighing into your neck, and a rooster somewhere nearby muttering dreams. You fall asleep to a lullaby of rustles, clucks, and the occasional suspicious splash from the chamber pot corner. Not everyone loved this arrangement. Some peasants built a raised platform or loft to separate people from animals. Others hung curtains to partition the human half from the barn half. But the lines blurred constantly, especially when temperatures dropped and even the chickens began to shiver. Historians still debate how common full cohabitation with livestock was. Some argue it was a rare, desperate solution during extreme cold snaps. Others believe it was the norm for most smallholders in Northern Europe, an efficient way to maximize both heat and manure collection in a single room. You, however, don't have the luxury of scholarly detachment. You have hooves stepping on your cloak and a goat attempting to eat the hem of your tunic. You swat her gently. She bleats. You both understand the rules. Of course, this arrangement comes with compromises. Fleas, smells, the occasional piglet stepping on your face. But you've grown numb to the downsides. You even find it hard to sleep without the quiet snuffling noises, like a particularly damp white noise machine. Some say it even fostered a kind of emotional bond. You don't just raise your animals, you live beside them, protect them, rely on them. When a pig gets sick, it matters. When a chicken stops laying, it's not just a resource, it's someone you've watched roosting above the hearth all winter. You reach out now, half awake, and pat Pig on the side. She grunts softly, nestling deeper into her straw. The dog stretches, then curls tighter, chin resting on your ankle. The wind rattles the shutters, the fire's barely a whisper, but your bed is full of bodies, of breath, of muffled warmth. It's not quiet, it's not private, it's not exactly clean. But it is, somehow, home. You're up late again, not by choice this time, but because there's giggling in the hayloft. You know that sound. Everyone does. It's the muffled rustle of two people trying very hard not to wake anyone, failing miserably, and probably getting straw in places that will itch for days. You roll your eyes, pull the blanket tighter, and try to ignore the soft whisper of winter courtship overhead. In a medieval village, privacy was about as common as fresh pears in February. If you wanted a moment alone, or, let's be honest, alone with someone else, your options were limited. But the hayloft, that was sacred territory. Slightly warmer, far more cushioned, and just secluded enough that a tryst could pass for, say, checking on the goats. The hayloft wasn't just for flirting, though. It was prime winter real estate. Elevated above the ground, it stayed drier, warmer, and better insulated with thick bundles of hay or straw packed beneath you. In the bitter months, it sometimes doubled as extra sleeping space, particularly for teenagers too old to snuggle their parents but too cold to brave a spot by the door. And yes, sometimes it doubled as a honeymoon suite. If you'd just been married or unofficially attached, you might spend your first few nights up in the loft. It wasn't glamorous, but it beat sharing a blanket with your cousin. You got a little privacy, a little distance from the snoring and the chamber pot, and if you were really lucky, a bit of borrowed warmth from the goats penned beneath. Of course, word got around. It always did. Someone would cough pointedly at breakfast. Someone else would raise their eyebrows. You'd hear a faint song later in the day with lyrics suspiciously adjusted to include hay and play. It was teasing, mostly harmless and traditional. Because deep down, everyone knew the truth. Winter was long. Affection helped. Historians still speculate about how often romantic encounters happened in haylofts. Court records from the time occasionally list fornication in a barn as an actual charge, which suggests that yes, it happened often enough to require paperwork. But it wasn't all mischief. Sometimes a hayloft was the only place to have a whispered conversation that wasn't overheard by your entire family. Sometimes it was a place to cry, away from curious eyes, or to dream, watching the moonlight slant through the slats in the wall, imagining spring. Hay made for surprisingly good insulation, especially when piled deep. Its structure traps air and retains heat, and unlike damp earth or cold timber floors, it offers a little bounce, a little give. Sure, it itches, and sure, there's always a risk of stepping in something left behind by a barn cat, but as far as peasant comfort goes, it's practically deluxe. Tonight, as the giggling subsides and the loft settles, you wonder who it was. Someone you know. Maybe the baker's apprentice and that red-haired girl from across the lane. Maybe not. Doesn't matter. What matters is that they found warmth in the cold, and you, beneath them, eventually drifted back to sleep, comforted by the soft, slow sighs of straw and secrets. Because in winter, love is a blanket, a shared apple, a hand under the hay. You wake up to sneezing again. Not your own this time, but from the corner where your uncle sleeps, wrapped in 3 cloaks and a sheep pelt, nose redder than a boiled beet. He's muttering something between a prayer and a curse, and someone hands him a rag that used to be a shirt sleeve. Welcome to the season of sniffles, where medieval peasants fought winter not only with wool and fire, but with a toolbox of strange, sometimes charming, sometimes mildly alarming remedies. Feeling chilled to the bone? Rub goose grease on your chest and wrap it with nettlecloth. Got a hacking cough? Boil up a potion of sage, honey, and onion water. One of the children has a fever? Bury a clove of garlic in their pillow and sprinkle the mattress with dried lavender, assuming you didn't eat it last week. You don't question these rituals. They're part medicine, part magic, part it worked once probably. And honestly, they're all you've got. Your grandmother insists on heating up a concoction made from old wine, thyme, and mustard seeds. She calls it a tonic. You call it a challenge. It tastes like a dare and smells like foot stew. But you drink it because what else are you going to do? Visit a doctor. Doctors, when they exist, are few and far between, and their services are not for the likes of you. So you rely on the local wise woman, who may or may not be considered a witch depending on the day and the mood of the parish priest. She knows what to do with bee stings, sore throats, sprains, and heartbreak. She keeps little bundles of herbs tied to her rafters and mutters instructions as she hands you tiny cloth parcels with cryptic labels like wind chaser or boil quietener. Tonight she's recommended something called plague vinegar, a mixture of rosemary, sage, mint, and cloves steeped in cider vinegar. You dab it under your nose. You still catch a whiff of the pig's corner, but also a little eucalyptus-wise something that feels like a forest pretending it's not winter. There's also the talismans, amulets strung from bits of bone, coins hammered flat and etched with crosses, even scraps of parchment with Latin phrases tucked into shoes or sewn into sleeves. One neighbor swears by a cold warding egg, a fresh hen's egg buried under the threshold and replaced every full moon. You nod politely. You're not above trying it next. Historians still debate the effectiveness of medieval cold remedies. Some were surprisingly sensible: honey, onion, garlic, warm drinks, rest. Others were rooted in humoral theory, where balance between bodily fluids dictated health, and treatment meant purging bloodletting or more leeches. You stay away from those, if you can. But folklore was just as potent as herb lore. People believed in frost spirits that entered through your toes if you didn't bless your socks. Some slept with sprigs of holly above their beds to ward off coughing fits. Others sang certain chants when boiling water for tea, just in case the steam carried prayers upward. And of course there were saints. Saint Blaise for throats, Saint Sebastian for plagues, Saint Brigid if your cough came with fever. You whisper their names sometimes under your breath as you sip warm broth or hold a cloth over the fire to wrap around someone's forehead. Despite all this, people got sick. A lot. Children with rattling lungs, elders with slow, labored breath. Even the strongest among you might wake up one morning with a chill that never leaves. Winter didn't need war or famine, it had phlegm. But you fight it together. Someone brings hot stew. Someone offers their scarf. Someone sneaks into the woods to find wild thyme. You sleep in a heap, each of you hoping the other's warmth might push back whatever cold has taken hold. Your uncle coughs again. Someone passes a mug of something steaming and sweetened with the last of the honey. He nods, sips, grimaces. And in that moment, surrounded by smoke, wool, and odd-smelling salves, you realize that winter isn't beaten by strength or wealth, but by stubborn, strange little rituals, and the hope that maybe, just maybe, spring is listening. You're counting again. Not sheep this time, though they'd be warmer company than your current corner of the bed. No, tonight you're counting wool, specifically the few precious tufts that still line the collar of your cloak, because each thread, each square inch is taxed, tracked, and worth more than you'd like to admit. This is the season of tithes and tolls, where staying warm isn't just a matter of survival, but also a matter of accounting. Wool in medieval Europe was wealth, not just the fine, buttery fleece spun into cloaks for the nobility, but even the coarse, scratchy stuff that made your socks and tunic. For peasants, owning a few sheep, or having access to their wool, meant the difference between enduring winter and simply shivering through it. But the wool wasn't entirely yours. Enter the wool tax. Depending on your region, your lord, or your parish, a portion of your spun wool, sometimes raw, sometimes woven, was owed as rent, tithe, or duty. You might spin for hours only to watch the best skeins handed off to someone richer, warmer, and slightly smugger. The church got its share too. Tithes weren't just about crops. In winter, you might owe a blanket portion, or the first fleece from your best ewe. Some villages had customs where parishioners donated wool to clothe the poor. Admirable, yes, but only after you'd patched your own sleeves a dozen times. And when harvest was bad and the cold came early, you might find yourself bartering wool directly for food. One neighbor gets a sack of oats, another gets dried fish, you get to keep your scarf barely. The irony, even as you clutch your woolen cloak and wish for more layers, merchants from the city are getting rich shipping fleece across borders. England, especially in the later medieval period, practically ran on wool exports. Historians have joked that sheep built empires, and they weren't far off. But the peasants doing the shearing, carding, spinning, and freezing didn't see much of that gold. You did see the lords, though, cloaked in velvet-lined wool dyed deep red or blue if they were especially fond of showing off. Their layers were many, yours were counted. And yet wool still connected the community. Villagers might share spinning wheels, swap dye recipes, onion skins for yellow, woad for blue, or gather in a warm corner to twist threads together while trading gossip. Children learned to card fleece before they could read. Men patched cloaks with rough stitches. Women spun by firelight until their fingers cramped. It wasn't just clothing, it was lifeline, a toddler's mitten, a dying grandfather's final blanket, a wedding gift, a funeral shroud. One woman in your village makes cloaks out of scraps stitched into elaborate patterns, not for fashion, but because no single piece is large enough to cover the shoulders alone. Each patch tells a story. That one from the year the snows came early. That one dyed with elderberries from the monastery garden. That one traded for a goose, now long eaten. And then there's the hidden cost of warmth. The sin of vanity, the preacher warns, creeps in when your tunic is too fine, when your winter hood is lined with someone else's labor, when your feet are shod in wool slippers while your neighbor walks barefoot. Be humble, he says, even as he buttons his fur-trimmed cassock. You try to listen. You try not to covet the wool cap your cousin wears, hand-knit, double-lined, and stolen from her dead husband's chest. But mostly, you try to stay warm. Tonight, you turn over in bed, pulling your cloak tighter around your shoulders. The edges are frayed. The lining has thinned. You imagine the sheep it once came from, snug in some distant barn, blissfully unaware that her winter coat is now your only protection from the cold. And somewhere out there, someone is counting that wool, weighing it, taxing it. But in here, in this drafty, cramped little house full of breathing bodies and borrowed blankets, you are warm enough, just. The air smells faintly of smoke, apples, and something sweet, something rare. Tonight is not like other nights. Tonight, the village glows. Candles flicker in windows. Banners made of dried herbs and ribbons hang across doors. The church bells have rung longer than usual, and even the dogs seem quieter, like they, too, are waiting for something. It's the longest night of the year, or close to it, and that means it's time for firelight festivals, winter saints, and one of the few things that make freezing season bearable, a proper feast. You shuffle into the long house in your best tunic, the one that doesn't smell like goats yet, and take a seat beside your neighbors. The benches creak, the air is thick with bodies and anticipation, and then you see it, roasted apples. They're bubbling, slightly charred, smelling of cinnamon if someone got fancy, or just browned with honey if not. Either way, they're a gift, a memory of autumn, served warm, to remind everyone that the earth isn't done giving just yet. And then comes the spiced ale. It's thin, weak by modern standards, but bubbling with flavor: clove, nutmeg, maybe a few stolen drops of wine if the steward wasn't looking. It's passed around in shared mugs, warming more than just your throat. For a brief golden hour, you forget that the outside world is coated in frost. This is winter festivity, not like a noble's banquet, all silver plates and lute players, but a peasant's joy, simple, noisy, crowded, and full of smoke. Children play in the corners, chasing each other between legs. Someone strikes up a song on a hurdy-gurdy. A woman with a cracked voice sings a verse about St. Lucy leading lost travelers with her eyes glowing like lanterns. You remember this every year. The midwinter gathering. It has many names: Yule, solstice, candle day, depending on who's telling it. But its purpose is the same: to mark the turning point, to remind everyone that the sun will return eventually. Historians still debate which customs were pagan leftovers and which came from the church. But the people didn't care. A good excuse for ale and dancing was a blessing from any god who'd offer it. Someone brings out a pie, meat and fruit mixed, the flavors clashing gloriously. Someone else ladles out a root vegetable stew, thick enough to stand a spoon in. There's no meat for everyone, but bones have been boiled into the broth, and that counts. You sing, you sway, you clap along even when you don't know the rhythm. For one glittering moment, you feel rich. Outside, the wind still howls. Snow drifts against the cottage walls, but inside, the heat of fire and people, the sharp sweetness of spiced cider, the shared voices raised in defiance of darkness. This is power. This is warmth that seeps beneath the skin. And it's not just physical. There's something about celebration that stirs the soul. Even the grumpiest elder in the village is tapping their foot. The widow from 2 doors down cracks a smile. The boy who rarely speaks is humming. You feel it settle over you like a second blanket. This rare togetherness, this joy you didn't know you were missing until it returned. Eventually, the fire burns low. People begin to drift home. Someone carefully wraps the leftover bread in a cloth. Someone else collects the mugs. There's still ash on your hands and a bit of stewed parsnip in your teeth, but your heart is full. Back in your cottage, as you pull your cloak over your shoulders and nestle into the straw, the warmth lingers. You think of roasted apples, of crooked harmonies, of laughter rising like sparks into the rafters. Winter is not yet over. But tonight, it bowed its head, just a little. Tonight, sleep won't come easy. Your legs ache, your back is stiff, and no matter how many times you roll over, your feet remain stubbornly cold. You've got 2 layers of wool, a sack of hay under your hips, and a nightcap pulled down past your eyebrows, but the wind still finds you. It always does. So you sit up, slowly, and consider your options. There aren't many. The fire is out. The dog has claimed the warmest spot near the ashes, curled in a tight, smug ball. Your brother is muttering in his sleep, tangled in a blanket he won't share. You tiptoe around the chamber pot and settle into your last resort, sleeping upright. It's not glamorous. It's not particularly restful. But for some peasants, it was standard winter practice, especially for the elderly or those plagued by stiff joints, coughs, or too much cabbage stew. You wedge yourself into the corner, back against the wall, legs drawn in, arms crossed, with a heavy cloak draped over your shoulders like a shawl, and your hood cinched tight around your face. You resemble a brooding mushroom. Oddly enough, it works. Sleeping upright keeps your chest higher, easier on the lungs if you've got a cold. It allows you to stay wrapped tightly without crushing your own breath, and it keeps your nose from pressing against the icy bedding. Some even say it helps avoid nightmares, though that might just be a bedtime superstition. You're not alone in this habit. Across the village, others are likely doing the same, propped against stools, walls, or even each other. In some regions, people fashioned special chairs for winter sleeping, angled slightly, padded with straw, draped with cloth. They weren't comfortable, but they were practical. Historians have noted references to sleeping sits, particularly in colder climates where the combination of poor insulation and respiratory illness made lying flat too risky. In some households, a family member might sit upright near the hearth all night, occasionally tending to embers, dozing between coughs. You recall one old tale, half folklore, half warning, about a woman who slept lying down in the cold and woke with her hair frozen to the floorboards. Whether it's true or not, you're not taking chances. Your corner spot has perks. You're near the window, and while it leaks cold air like a sieve, it also lets in the moonlight. Pale silver spills across the floor, illuminating the chicken perched on a rafter and the gentle rise and fall of your sister's blanket. It's a quiet, private kind of view, a world reduced to outlines and breath. You shift your weight, careful not to creak. The trick is to find the balance point between dozing and tipping over. One too bold nod, and you'll jolt awake with a forehead bump or a sharp straw poke in an unfortunate place. Still, there's a meditative rhythm to it. Upright sleeping forces stillness. No tossing, no limb theft, just steady breath, the occasional shiver, and the strange comfort of keeping watch while others dream. Eventually, your body adjusts. The ache dulls, your head droops. You dream of odd things: warm fields, sunlit bread, a tunic made of clouds. Your mouth twitches. You might even snore. And when the rooster crows, far too early as usual, you open your eyes and realize you slept. Not well, not deeply, but enough to greet the morning with your joints still working and your cloak still around your shoulders. You stand, stretch carefully, and glance at the others, still bundled, still dreaming. The fireless hearth awaits, the frozen water bucket waits beside it. The world is still winter, but so are you. And tonight, when the cold comes creeping again, you'll remember this corner, your secret perch, the place you didn't quite sleep but didn't freeze either. A small victory, upright. The snow is back. You can hear it before you see it, the soft, uneven hiss of flakes brushing against the shutters, the occasional thump as a clump slides off the thatch and lands with a muffled flumph. When you finally crack the door open, the world is unrecognizable. It's beautiful, stupidly beautiful. The entire village is blanketed in soft, blinding white. Every roof, every fence post, every crooked cartwheel left leaning in the lane now wears a snowy cap. The trees shimmer like glass sculptures, and the church spire rises through the fog like something out of a forgotten prayer. You hate it. Not because it's ugly, because it's a trap. Snow on the thatch means weight. A lot of it, and medieval roofs, charming as they may be in modern storybooks, were often nothing more than bundles of reeds or straw laid thick over wooden beams. With enough snow, those roofs buckle. Sometimes they leak. Sometimes they collapse. You've seen it happen, heard the terrifying crack, the sudden shriek, the family standing in their nightshirts ankle-deep in debris. So you grab a long pole and begin the slow, icy task of knocking snow from the eaves. Carefully, methodically, one side, then the other. Thatch is fragile when it's wet and frozen, and a single overzealous jab could open a hole you'll regret for months. Still, it has to be done. Too much snow, and the ceiling above your bed might not last the week. And it's not just the roof. Snow finds its way into everything. It seeps into firewood piles, turning logs into spongy disappointments. It creeps under doors and melts into your socks. It disguises pits in the path, making every step outside a gamble between solid footing and ankle-deep surprise. But the worst part, the ice. After a few days, the fluffy charm wears off and everything begins to refreeze. Icicles grow like tusks from the eaves. Puddles harden into treacherous glass. The pig slips, you slip, someone sprains something important. Historians still debate just how frequently medieval villages dealt with heavy snowfall. Records are patchy, some winters mild, others monstrous. But folklore suggests that severe winters left scars in the collective memory. Stories about the year the cow froze standing or the night the river sang get passed down generation to generation like cautionary poetry. Still, it's not all misery. There's a certain hush that comes with fresh snow, a pause in the clamor of village life. Tools go quiet, chores slow. Children, after the obligatory warnings about slipping and frostbite, race outside to pelt each other with lumpy snowballs. They make snow creatures, pigs, saints, even caricatures of the local lord, which are promptly accidentally knocked over before adults see them. Inside, the world adjusts. You hang cloaks closer to the fire. You pile hay higher around sleeping children. You spread ashes on the icy doorstep for traction and mutter curses when you forget in the middle of the night. And still, the snow falls. You watch it from your bed, wrapped in every piece of cloth you own. The shutter cracked just enough to see the white blur beyond. For a moment, the world feels distant, like you're floating inside a snow globe shaken by some careless god. Then you remember the roof. You nudge your cousin awake. Time for another round with the pole. Because snow might look like a blessing from inside a warm castle, but down here, down where the fire's barely hanging on, where the blankets are always damp, where your boots haven't dried in weeks, snow is something else. Snow is weight, snow is danger, snow is work. But snow is also part of the rhythm. You learn to live with it, to respect it, to curse it under your breath while still admiring the way it turns even the filthiest lane into a silver path. And when it finally melts, when the first drip echoes off the eaves and the ice begins to crack like old bones, you'll miss it, just a little. But not today. Today, you've got snow to sweep. The wind has gone still. No rattling shutters tonight, no creaking beams or swirling snow outside the door. Just a thick, low silence that fills the house like smoke. It presses against your ears, your chest, your thoughts. These are the longest nights not by the clock, but by the weight of them. The ones where time seems to stretch between breaths and the cold feels almost thoughtful, watchful, like the darkness is sitting beside you, waiting for something. Tonight, no one speaks. The fire has been coaxed into one last glow, more memory than flame. The children are already curled in their usual heap, their soft breathing rising and falling like waves. Even the animals are quiet. The pig has settled with her chin on your boots. The dog, for once, isn't twitching in his dreams. And so you sit in silence, not because there's nothing to say, but because everyone already knows what you would say. The kind of silence that comes from long winters and long lives, a silence that speaks for you. There's comfort in it, strange as that may sound. When you're huddled together in a small, smoky room, sometimes the best kind of warmth isn't fire, it's presence. The knowledge that the people around you are breathing, enduring, dreaming beside you. You shift slightly, careful not to wake the boy beside you who's using your arm as a pillow. Your knees crack like old hinges. Your wool tunic smells of smoke and cabbage, and your fingers have forgotten what warmth feels like. But still, you're here. These nights sharpen everything. Not your senses, but your attention. You notice the way the fire sounds when it sighs, the rhythm of a cow chewing somewhere in the dark, the faint sound of someone muttering in their sleep, maybe praying, maybe just murmuring through a dream of summer. In this silence, your thoughts wander. You think of seasons past, of people no longer here, of that one year when the snow came early and your sister spent the night weaving straw mats with frozen fingers just to make the floor feel less like ice, of the time your uncle swore he saw a star blink at him, of the strange story about the saint who turned frost into flowers. You think of tomorrow, Will the firewood hold out? Will the goat give milk? Will your boots keep leaking? You don't ask these questions aloud, you just let them drift. The silence holds them. Historians often wonder how peasants handled the long, dark winters psychologically, with little stimulation, with minimal light, with the same walls, same chores, same slow rhythm for weeks on end. But maybe the question misses the point. Maybe it wasn't about handling it. Maybe it was about sinking into it, letting the night be what it was, a season of inwardness, of noticing, of resting, of enduring, not just physically, but quietly, spiritually. Winter as a practice in patience. You take a slow breath. The air inside the cottage is cool, but not cruel. You can still feel the warmth from earlier, the echoes of fire, stew, laughter. They linger, faint but real. Your hand rests on your knee. The boy beside you snores softly. You close your eyes. And in the deep hush, you feel it. Not loneliness, not even cold, but peace. Not loud, not perfect. Just enough. Drip. Just once at first, faint, soft enough that you think maybe you imagined it, but then again, and again, the steady, unmistakable rhythm of something new, something almost forgotten. Melt. The thaw has begun. Outside, the snow is retreating in slow, glistening sighs. It slips from the thatched roofs like icing from a cake left too long in the sun. Icicles shrink, bead by bead, tiny rivers forming along the edges of everything. Water runs through the gutters again. The earth, hidden for months, peeks out in patches of stubborn brown. You step outside and immediately feel it. The air has shifted. It's still cold, sure, but there's a softness to it now, a looseness, as if winter itself is exhaling for the first time in weeks. Beneath your boots, the snow gives way with a wet squelch, not crunchy, not powdery, just tired, like it too is ready to lie down and be done. You weren't expecting this. No one was. The old woman down the lane said the cold would last another fortnight, and you believed her, as everyone does, but nature had other plans. Inside, the children are stirring earlier than usual. One of them whispers, "I saw grass." You don't believe him. But later, you do see a spot of green near the cowshed, just a leaf, but bright, hope-colored. Of course, the thaw brings trouble too. That melting snow seeps into everything. The roof begins to drip. The floor turns to mush. The firewood, so carefully stacked, starts to sweat and steam and smell. The goat pen becomes a swamp. Historians still argue whether the medieval thaw was a time of joy or simply another form of hardship. The cold receded, yes, but it left behind rot, floods, mud, and sickness. Spring was not gentle. It crept in like a thief, stealing snow but leaving behind a mess. But still, you smile. Because it's not the mess that matters. It's the change. The idea that something different is possible. That tomorrow might not be exactly like yesterday. That the sun might come back, not just for a visit but to stay. The village begins to shift its rhythm. The cart paths reappear. The well starts flowing again, no longer sealed under a lid of ice. You spot someone outside with a rake, poking hopefully at the soil. It's too early, everyone agrees, but still, he pokes. Even the animals sense it. The chickens are louder. The pig ventures further from her favorite spot near the hearth. The dog digs enthusiastically at the ground, and then looks up at you, confused but satisfied. Inside, your clothes are still damp. The fire still struggles. The chamber pot still steams with menace. But you heard it, that drip. You felt the change in the air, the loosening of winter's grip. And tonight, as you lie down under the same scratchy wool, you feel just a little lighter. Not warmer, maybe, but more willing. The fire pops, the roof leaks a little, but outside water runs where snow once stood, and in your chest something thaws too. You don't say it aloud, but you think it just before sleep. Soon. The cold never really leaves you. Even when spring arrives in earnest, when the fields turn green and the sheep start dropping lambs like nervous clouds, you still carry winter in your spine, in your knees, in your knuckles that ache every time you haul water, in your memories. It lingers. You feel it in how carefully you still tuck in your sleeves, even on warm mornings, how you check the firewood pile out of habit, how you flinch slightly when you hear a wind howl, expecting it to be the kind that bites through wool and walls. You don't talk about it much. Nobody does, but the cold left its mark on everyone in the cottage. You see it in the way your mother folds blankets tighter, even now, in how your cousin won't sleep without her boots nearby, in how the children crowd closer together than necessary, even when the night is mild. The fire burns longer these days. You let it sometimes, not because you need the heat, but because you miss the sound, that gentle pop, that slow crackling rhythm that used to be the heartbeat of your home in the longest nights. And yes, the pig still sleeps inside. Out of habit, mostly. The snow is gone, but you still trace the path it used to take across the window ledge. You remember the night it broke the roof, the night it softened into slush and finally let you smell earth again. You remember the joy of roasted apples and the comfort of shared silence. You remember. Historians might call your world primitive, harsh, undignified, and in many ways they'd be right. But they'd miss something. They'd miss the way you all shared breath in a single room, turning closeness into survival. The way a single cup of hot broth could bring peace. The way laughter echoed louder in low-ceilinged rooms when your socks were dry and the stew was just salty enough. They'd miss the strength in the stillness. Because winter, for a medieval peasant, wasn't just endured. It was known, studied, outwitted in 100 quiet ways. Through layers and fires and shared beds. Through soup and song. Through stories whispered in the dark and straw pressed against the floor to dull the chill. You don't dread the next winter. Not exactly. But when the cold returns, and it will, you'll be ready. You'll bank the fire carefully, tuck your boots close to the embers, call the pig indoors, pull the blanket tighter, and sleep as you always do beneath the weight of wool, hay, and memory. You're still now. The snow has melted in your mind. The fire has burned low, and the voices, the laughter, the coughs, the gentle grumbles of animals and family have softened into quiet memory. You feel the straw beneath you, the faded weight of a wool blanket, the hush of nightfall settling against the beams of your one-room cottage. Outside, there is only the slow rhythm of dripping thaw, the creak of timbers, the whisper of wind no longer cruel, just curious. Inside you're wrapped in layers not just of cloth, but of time, of stories, of resilience. You've lived this winter with them now. The shepherd, the healer, the snoring cousin, the pig curled at your feet. You've stirred their soup, patched their socks, whispered their prayers. You've survived alongside them. And now you rest. The world beyond this moment, modern, loud, impatient, can wait. For now, you are tucked into a pocket of the past, a quieter world, rough-edged but intimate, where sleep comes slowly but fully, where silence is not empty but generous. Let the straw cradle you. Let the distant memory of snow fade into softness. Let the breath of the hearth's last embers warm the edges of your dreaming. You are safe here. Sleep now. Sleep well.